The desolate moon of Tyrannus was a forgotten corner of the galaxy, its surface marked by jagged rock formations and swirling dust storms. It was a place where the Galactic Council sent those they wished to forget, an inhospitable wasteland unfit for life. But life endured here, in the form of two sisters, Lyra and Alara. Both were mutants, half human and half alien, cast out by a galaxy that feared their abilities. Lyra, the elder of the two, was tall with skin that shimmered faintly in the dim light, her emerald eyes reflecting an alien heritage that the Council deemed dangerous. Her power to manipulate electromagnetic fields had made her a threat in the eyes of those who ruled the stars. Alara, younger by 3 years, shared her sister's luminous beauty but possessed a quieter strength. Her power was subtler, tied to the elements of the cosmos, gravity, energy flows, and the unseen forces that bound the universe. For years, they had survived in exile, scavenging from the wreckage of forgotten ships and using their powers to carve out a fragile existence. The Council had abandoned them here, hoping Tyrannus would be their grave. But the sisters endured, living in the shadows of a galaxy that had cast them aside. One day, as the sisters were tending to the small garden they had coaxed into existence with their abilities, a distant rumble disturbed the oppressive silence. Alara looked up, her sharp eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. "Lyra, do you hear that?" she asked, her voice tense. Lyra straightened, her hand pausing over the soil as she listened. The rumble grew louder, a low, mechanical groan that seemed out of place in the wasteland. "It's a ship," Lyra whispered, her heart quickening. "But it's not the Council." Alara stood beside her, eyes wide. "Do you think someone is coming to rescue us?" Lyra shook her head, her expression guarded. "No one knows we're here, but something's happening. We need to be ready." They sprinted toward the jagged cliffs that provided shelter for their makeshift home, their senses heightened by years of survival in the harsh environment. As they reached the top of the cliffs, they saw it. A ship descending rapidly, trailing smoke and flames as it tumbled toward the ground. The craft was small, clearly damaged, and on a collision course with the rocky surface of Tyrannus. With a thunderous crash, the ship struck the ground, sending a shockwave through the earth beneath their feet. Dust and debris filled the air as the ship's remains smoldered in the distance. Lyra and Alara exchanged a glance, their expressions a mixture of fear and hope. "Whoever it is," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the uncertainty, "they're not going to last long out here." Alara nodded. "We should help them." Without another word, the sisters made their way down the cliffs toward the crash site. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning metal, and the ship's hull was twisted and broken, its once sleek surface now a crumpled wreck. As they approached cautiously, a figure emerged from the wreckage, staggering, coughing, and covered in soot. The man looked up, his eyes meeting theirs. He was human, with dark hair matted against his forehead and a bloodied face. Despite his injuries, there was a spark of determination in his gaze. He took a shaky step forward, clearly struggling to stay upright. Who are you?" he rasped, his voice rough from the crash. Lyra stepped forward, her heart pounding. "We could ask you the same thing." The man swayed on his feet, his vision blurring. "Captain Nathan Pierce," he managed, his voice strained. "I." His sentence was cut short as his legs gave way, and he collapsed in a heap before them. Lyra knelt beside him, her hand on his chest to feel his shallow breaths. She looked up at Alara, her expression urgent. "He's hurt. We need to get him inside." Together, the sisters carried Nathan back to their shelter, unsure of who he was or why he had come to Tyrannus, but knowing that his arrival had changed everything. The dim light inside their cave flickered softly as Lyra and Alara laid Nathan on a makeshift bed, carefully tending to his wounds. His breathing was labored, and sweat glistened on his brow. Alara moved quickly, using her powers to sense the flows of energy in his body, stabilizing his heart rate and reducing the shock from his injuries. "He's lucky he survived the crash," Alara muttered, her hands glowing faintly as she worked to calm the energy within him. "We should ask him how he ended up here, but not until he's stronger." Lyra nodded in agreement, wiping the grime from Nathan's face with a damp cloth. She couldn't deny the strange feeling that had settled in her chest since they had found him, a mix of curiosity and concern. It had been so long since they had seen another living soul, and this human, This Captain Nathan Pierce had crash-landed on the very moon where they had been left to die. Hours passed and Nathan stirred, groaning as he regained consciousness. His eyes fluttered open, taking in his surroundings. He winced as he sat up, his hand going to his side where a deep bruise had formed. Where am I?" Nathan asked, his voice hoarse. "You're on Tyrannus," Lyra replied, sitting beside him. "A moon at the edge of the galaxy. Do you remember crashing?" Nathan rubbed his temples, trying to piece together his scattered thoughts. "Yeah, I remember. My ship's systems failed during an exploratory mission. I had no control, and before I knew it, I was headed straight for this rock." Alara stood near the entrance, watching the horizon for any sign of danger. "This rock, as you call it, is our prison." Nathan's brow furrowed, confusion clouding his features. "Prison? What do you mean?" Lyra sighed, her gaze distant as she recalled the events that had led to their exile. "The Galactic Council exiled us here years ago. We're mutants, half human, half alien. They feared us because of our powers, so they abandoned us on this moon to die." Nathan stared at her in disbelief. "The Council did this? They left you here?" Alara's voice was sharp, her anger barely restrained. "They didn't just leave us. They made sure no one could find us. No one, until now." Nathan's expression softened with sympathy as he looked at them both. "I'm sorry. I had no idea." Lyra stood, her frustration clear. "Sorry won't help us now. The Council's ships patrol these sectors. They may already know you're here. If they find us—" "They won't," Nathan interrupted, his voice firm despite his weakened state. "My ship was damaged beyond recognition when it went down. If they were tracking me, they've lost my signal by now." Alara crossed her arms, skepticism in her eyes. "And why should we trust you? For all we know, you could be working for the Council, sent here to finish what they started." Nathan shook his head, meeting her gaze with sincerity. "I don't work for the Council. I'm just an explorer, charting uncharted regions of space for scientific study. I had no idea this place even existed." Lyra studied him, her instincts telling her that he was telling the truth. "If that's true, then why are you here? Why risk coming to the Outer Rim?" Nathan's expression darkened slightly as he recalled his mission. "Because there's something happening out here. Something the Council doesn't want anyone to know about. I've been gathering data on their operations, and I think they're hiding something. Something big." Alara's gaze narrowed. "What kind of something?" Nathan hesitated, his voice lowering. "I'm not sure yet, but I know one thing. If the Council finds out I've survived and made contact with you, they'll send everything they have to wipe us out." The sisters exchanged a glance, the gravity of Nathan's words sinking in. They had spent years evading the Council's patrols, but now with this human astronaut in their midst, the stakes had risen dramatically. Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Nathan's. "Then we need to leave this place, before it's too late." Nathan nodded, his resolve hardening. "I can help you, but we'll need to find a way off this moon, and fast." Together, they began to plan their escape, knowing that the clock was ticking and the forces that sought to destroy them were already closing in. Their fates were now intertwined, and there was no turning back. The cave was quiet except for the low hum of energy radiating from Alara's hands as she worked on the battered remains of Nathan's equipment. The light flickered over the rocky walls, casting long shadows that danced as if alive. Outside, the wind howled across the barren plains of Tyrannus, a reminder of the isolation that had held Lyra and Alara captive for so long. Nathan sat across from them, deep in thought. He had shared the details of his ship's crash and what remained of its systems. Though the vessel was beyond repair, some of its components might still be useful, especially if they hoped to escape the moon before the Galactic Council arrived. "This ship's mainframe is toast," Alara said, not looking up from her work. "But the propulsion units, I think we can salvage something." Nathan nodded, his mind already turning over ideas. "We might be able to use the core to boost whatever craft we find, assuming we can find one hidden in all this wreckage." Lyra crossed her arms, her gaze lingering on the distant horizon. "There's an old transport near the mountains, abandoned when the Council first left us here. It's in pieces, but the frame might hold. If we can patch it up, it might be enough to get us into orbit." "Orbit's good," Nathan replied, standing and pacing as he considered their options. "But once we're up there, We'll need to avoid detection. I can modify the ship's stealth system to blend with the ion trails in this sector. It'll mask our energy signature, at least long enough to get out of Tyrannus's gravity well. Alara looked at him, impressed. You've thought about this. Nathan met her gaze, his expression serious. I've been running from the council for a while now. Escaping tight situations is part of the job. Lyra turned to face them, her face hardened with resolve. Then we leave tonight. The longer we wait, the more time the council has to track your last transmission. If they find us here... They won't, Nathan interrupted, standing beside her. I won't let that happen. Something in his voice calmed Lyra, though she wouldn't admit it aloud. She had learned long ago not to trust easily, but there was something different about Nathan. A kind of quiet strength that made her feel, for the first time in years, that escape was possible. All right, Lyra said after a long pause. Let's make it happen. The hours passed quickly as they prepared for the journey ahead. Nathan showed the sisters how to dismantle the remaining pieces of his crashed ship, stripping out the core components that would serve them later. Lyra and Alara used their powers to reinforce the structure of the old transport ship, drawing on the latent energy in the metal to fuse the damaged sections back together. It was slow work, but bit by bit, the rusting hulk began to take shape again. By nightfall, the transport was ready, a skeletal shell patched together with the salvage technology from Nathan's wreckage. The engines, though old, had been upgraded with a makeshift propulsion core, and the cockpit was outfitted with enough of Nathan's remaining systems to get them into orbit. As they prepared to leave, Nathan paused, looking at the sisters. Once we're in orbit, the council might detect us. If they send ships, it won't be easy getting away. We've faced worse, Lyra replied, her voice firm. Nathan smiled, but there was a shadow of doubt in his eyes. I'm counting on that. With a final check of the ship's systems, they climbed aboard. Lyra took the pilot's seat, her hands steady on the controls, while Nathan worked from the co-pilot's position, monitoring the engine core. Alara settled into the navigation console, her fingers moving over the holographic display as she calculated their flight path. The engines whined, sputtered, and then roared to life. The transport shuddered as it lifted off the ground, the weight of years in exile falling away as they ascended into the night sky. But as the stars opened up before them, so too did the dangers waiting in the void. The Starbound, as Nathan had named the makeshift transport, soared through the dark reaches of space, its hull creaking under the strain of its age and hasty repairs. Tyrannus was a distant memory now, its barren surface receding into the endless black behind them. For the first time in years, Lyra and Alara felt the pull of freedom, but it came with the gnawing anxiety of being hunted. Nathan sat beside Lyra in the cockpit, monitoring the systems and plotting their course. He had been quiet since their escape, his mind focused on the challenges ahead. Lyra, sensing the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, finally broke the silence. We made it off Tyrannus, she said, her voice calm but questioning. But I know that look. You're worried. Nathan glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I've been in worse situations, but the Council's patrols are thick in this sector. If we're spotted before we reach the outer system, we'll be in for a fight. We've fought them before, Lyra said, her confidence masking the apprehension she felt deep down. This isn't the first time we've had to run. Nathan studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. I've noticed that. You two handle yourselves well. I've seen trained soldiers crack under less pressure. Lyra smirked, though there was no humor in her eyes. When the Council exiles you, you learn fast. Alara and I had no choice. Nathan's gaze softened as he looked out at the stars. I know what that's like. For a moment, Lyra remained silent, watching him. She had felt it from the beginning. A shared understanding between them. A quiet bond formed through survival. She had grown used to relying only on Alara, but Nathan's presence was beginning to change that. He wasn't just a man passing through their lives. He had become part of their fight. In the back of the cockpit, Alara was listening, her eyes flicking between the two of them. She had sensed it too, the way Nathan and Lyra gravitated toward each other. But it wasn't just Lyra. Nathan had connected with both of them in ways neither sister had expected. How did you end up here, Nathan? Alara asked, her voice cutting through the silence. Exiled too? Nathan hesitated, his jaw tightening. Not quite. I was a soldier once. The council set me on a mission I couldn't accept. I refused, and that made me a liability. So I ran. Been running ever since. Alara frowned. What mission? Nathan's expression darkened. The council wanted to weaponize something they didn't understand, just like they tried to do with you. There are others out there with powers like yours, but different. The council wants control, and if they can't have it, they destroy it. Lyra's eyes narrowed. And you turned your back on them. Nathan nodded. I saw what they were doing to people. It wasn't what I signed up for, so I took my knowledge and ran. That's why they want me dead. A heavy silence filled the cockpit, the weight of Nathan's confession hanging in the air. Lyra felt a strange sense of comfort in his words. He understood their struggle because he had lived it, and he had chosen to fight back. Alara, sitting in the back, leaned forward. You could have left us on Tyrannus. You didn't have to help. Nathan met her gaze, his eyes filled with quiet intensity. I couldn't leave you there. No one deserves to be left behind like that. For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence, the stars outside a blur as they sailed through the vast emptiness of space. Lyra felt the bond between them deepen, not just as allies, but as something more. Something unspoken. But the quiet didn't last. Suddenly, the ship's alarm blared, and Nathan's eyes shot to the radar. Damn it, he muttered under his breath. Council ships. Lyra's heart sank as she saw the blips on the radar, moving toward them at a rapid pace. How many? Too many to outrun, Nathan replied, his voice grim. They've got a blockade ahead. They must have picked up our ion trail when we launched. Alara's eyes widened in panic. What do we do? Nathan's hands moved quickly over the controls, his expression determined. We fight. Lyra's pulse quickened, her hands gripping the controls. Alara, focus on the shields. Nathan, get the weapons online. If they want us, they're going to have to work for it. The sisters exchanged a glance, their bond unspoken but stronger than ever. Together with Nathan, they had a chance, not just to escape, but to survive. As the council ships closed in, Lyra's voice cut through the tension, her words steady and defiant. Let's show them what we're made of. The battle for their freedom had begun. The black void of space was suddenly filled with the streaking lines of blaster fire as the council ships opened fire on the Starbound. The ship shuddered violently under the barrage, alarms blaring throughout the cockpit. Lyra's knuckles whitened as she gripped the controls, swerving the transport to evade the incoming fire. Shields are holding, but they won't last long, Alara shouted over the chaos, her hands flying over the console, trying to reinforce the ship's fragile defenses. Incoming fighters on R6, Nathan barked, pulling up the weapon systems on his display. The old ship had a few guns left, but they were ancient, and their power was no match for the sleek and deadly fighters closing in. We can't take them head on. We need to shake them off. Lyra's eyes scanned the star map on her display, searching for any tactical advantage. The blockade ahead was massive, a wall of council warships designed to crush anything that dared challenge their authority. But then she saw it. A debris field from a long-forgotten space battle, a chaotic mass of broken ships and asteroids floating in the void. There, Lyra said, pointing to the display. If we can make it to the debris field, we might be able to lose them in the wreckage. Nathan glanced at the coordinates, quickly assessing the risk. It's a tight squeeze, but it's our best shot. Take us in. Lyra pushed the engines to their limits, and the Starbound surged forward, heading straight for the debris field. Behind them, the council fighters gave chase, their sleek forms closing in with deadly precision. As they approached the field, Nathan's voice came over the comms, tense but focused. Alara, divert all remaining power to the shields. We're going to need every ounce of protection we can get. Alara nodded, her fingers moving swiftly over the controls. I'm on it. The Starbound plunged into the debris field, twisting and turning through the twisted wreckage of ancient battleships and asteroid fragments. The council fighters followed, but the narrow pathways through the debris slowed their pursuit, forcing them to take careful aim. Nathan fired the ship's rear guns, taking out 2 of the council fighters with a well-placed shot. But more were closing in, their weapons tearing through the wreckage, forcing Lyra to make sharp, stomach-churning turns to avoid a direct hit. Keep them off us for a little longer, Lyra shouted, her eyes locked on the path ahead. Nathan gritted his teeth, focusing on the fighters in his sights. I'm trying. But then, just as they were about to clear the debris field, a massive energy blast slammed into the ship, sending it spinning out of control. Lyra's vision blurred as the Starbound tumbled through space, the consoles around her sparking wildly. Alara screamed as she was thrown from her seat, her body slamming into the wall of the cockpit. Nathan reached out, grabbing the edge of the console to steady himself. Lyra, we're losing power. I know, Lyra shouted, her voice strained as she fought to regain control of the ship. But the damage was too severe. The ship's systems were failing, and they were heading toward a massive asteroid at breakneck speed. In a desperate move, Lyra pulled on the controls, redirecting all power to the engines in a last-ditch effort to avoid the asteroid. The ship veered just in time, skimming the surface of the asteroid before tumbling into the shadow of the massive rock. For a moment, everything went still. The ship drifted in the dark, hidden from the Council's sensors by the asteroid's interference. But inside the Starbound, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Alara groaned, pulling herself up from the floor, wincing in pain. Are we alive? Just barely, Nathan muttered, checking the damage on the console. The ship's systems are fried. We're dead in the water until we can make repairs. Lyra took a deep breath, her hands trembling from the adrenaline. We bought ourselves some time, but it won't last. The Council will keep searching. Alara limped over to Lyra's side, her eyes scanning the displays. We need to fix the ship. But even if we do, we can't fight them. Not like this. Nathan's brow furrowed as he considered their options. There's something you're not telling me. You both have abilities, powers. You've been using them to survive, but there's more to it, isn't there? Lyra hesitated, exchanging a glance with Alara. They had kept their full abilities hidden, even from Nathan, out of fear. But now, with no other options, the truth could no longer stay buried. Alara was the first to speak, her voice quiet but steady. Our powers, they're tied to something deeper, something ancient. Nathan frowned, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Lyra sighed, finally stepping forward to reveal what they had kept hidden. We're not just mutants, we're descendants of an alien race, the Arran. They were once powerful, capable of harnessing the energies of the universe. Our mother was one of the last of their kind, and she passed on those abilities to us. Nathan's eyes widened, the pieces falling into place. The Arran, I've read about them. They were believed to be extinct. The Council destroyed their world centuries ago. They tried, Alara said, her voice bitter. But some of them survived. Our mother did, and she kept us hidden for as long as she could, until the Council found us. Lyra continued, her tone more serious now. Our powers are still developing. We don't fully understand them, but we know the Council wants to control them, because they fear what we could become. Nathan stared at them both, the weight of their revelation sinking in. He had always known there was something different about the sisters, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. The power they carried within them wasn't just dangerous. It was the key to something much larger, something the Council feared above all else. Then we need to unlock your full potential, Nathan said, his voice firm. If we're going to survive this, we can't keep running. We have to fight back, and you two are the only ones who can tip the balance. Lyra looked at him, her heart pounding. You don't know what you're asking. I do, Nathan replied, meeting her gaze. You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together. Time was slipping through their fingers, like the stardust swirling outside the shattered hull of the Starbound. Lyra, Alara, and Nathan worked frantically to prepare the ship for what seemed like an inevitable final stand against the Galactic Council's approaching forces. The Council's warships were already closing in, their predatory silhouettes growing larger on the radar with each passing moment. Nathan crouched over the damaged engine core, sweat dripping down his face as he worked to reroute power to the shields. Shields at 30%, he muttered, frustrated. It'll hold for a while, but not long enough. We've got to do something drastic, or we're dead in the water. Alara, her eyes glowing faintly with the energy she was trying to manipulate, glanced up from the console. The Council's not going to stop until we're nothing more than a pile of debris floating in this asteroid field. Lyra stood by the viewport, her gaze fixed on the approaching ships. There was something predatory about the way the Council's warships advanced, their deadly intent clear. They weren't coming to negotiate, they were coming to destroy. Then we make sure they choke on that debris before they get to us. Nathan paused and looked up from his work, locking eyes with her. What are you thinking? Lyra turned away from the viewport, her eyes sharp with determination. We use the field to our advantage. This asteroid belt is dense with wreckage from battles long forgotten. Ships, broken satellites, planetary debris. Alara and I can manipulate the magnetic fields and gravity here, turn the debris into a weapon. Nathan's eyes widened as he understood her plan. You're talking about creating a minefield out of the wreckage? Exactly, Lyra confirmed, her voice cold with resolve. If we concentrate our powers, we can pull the debris toward their ships, disrupt their approach. It won't stop them for long, but it'll buy us the time we need. Nathan stood, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit as he nodded. That could work, but once they realize what we're doing, they'll adapt quickly. They always do. Alara's face tightened with concentration. She had been using her powers sparingly since their escape from Tyrannus, but this would require much more from her, and Lyra. We can't hold them off forever, she admitted, her voice strained. But we don't have to. We just need to create enough chaos to slip past them. Nathan thought for a moment, then turned toward the weapons console. I'll work on boosting the ship's thrusters and retrofitting what's left of our weapons. If we can create enough of a distraction, we might just be able to punch through their lines. Lyra glanced at her sister. Alara, are you ready? Alara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, centering herself. Let's do it. Outside the ship, the vast expanse of the asteroid field loomed, its cold, jagged rocks drifting in the endless black of space. Council warships were already closing in, cutting through the wreckage like sharks hunting in the deep. Their sleek forms glinted in the light of distant stars, and even from a distance, the sisters could feel the oppressive force of their presence. Lyra and Alara stepped toward the front of the cockpit, their hands hovering just above the console as they focused their powers. The energy within them stirred, responding to the ancient forces that flowed through their veins. Lyra's ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields began to hum, resonating with the metallic wreckage around them. Alara, meanwhile, reached out with her connection to gravity, feeling the subtle pulls and shifts of the asteroid field. The ship's sensors flickered as the sisters unleashed their powers, a low hum reverberating through the hull as the debris around the ship began to stir. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, chunks of metal and stone drifted toward the approaching warships. Like a silent, deadly wave, the debris field came alive. Nathan watched in awe as the sisters worked in perfect unison, their powers complementing each other in ways that made his heart race. He had known they were powerful, but this was something else entirely. The debris swirled and spun, forming a chaotic, ever-shifting barrier between the Starbound and the Council's fleet. Here they come, Nathan muttered, his voice tense as he watched the Council warships approach the edge of the debris field. The first Council ship, a sleek destroyer, moved in cautiously, its sensors sweeping through the asteroid belt. But it wasn't fast enough. A massive chunk of debris, the remains of an ancient battleship, hurtled toward it, crashing into the destroyer's shields with a force that sent ripples of energy through the surrounding space. The destroyer staggered, its shields flickering as more debris followed, slamming into it from all sides. A second wave of wreckage, pulled by Alara's manipulation of gravity, engulfed the ship, crushing its engines and sending it spinning out of control. Lyra gritted her teeth as she focused her energy, pulling the debris tighter, faster, into a concentrated storm. That's one down, she muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. But they're adapting. The second wave of Council ships came in faster, adjusting their approach to avoid the heaviest concentrations of debris. Their shields flared as they pushed through, their weapon systems coming online. They're going to break through, Alara warned. Her voice strained as she struggled to maintain control over the gravitational fields. Nathan's hands flew over the weapons console, activating what little firepower the Starbound had left. We can't keep this up. I'm charging the engines for a short jump, but it'll take a minute. We don't have a minute. Lyra shot back, her powers flickering as the strain of manipulating so much debris began to wear on her. Her vision blurred, and she could feel her strength waning, but she couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. The Council's lead ship, a massive cruiser, fired its main cannons, sending a volley of energy blasts toward the Starbound. The ship rocked violently as the blasts hit the shields, sparks flying from the consoles as systems overloaded. "Shields down to 10%. Nathan shouted, frantically rerouting power. "We need that jump now." Alara gasped, her hands shaking as she pushed her powers to their limits. "I can't hold it." Lyra's pulse quickened, desperation clawing at her as the Council ships closed in. But then, in the chaos of the battle, she felt something. A surge of power, deep within her. It was different this time, stronger than before. It wasn't just her own energy, it was the legacy of the arran, the ancient force her mother had always told her about, the power that had been sleeping inside her for years. Lyra closed her eyes, letting go of her fear. She reached for the power, drawing it into herself, feeling it flow through her veins like liquid fire. The debris around them shifted, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light as Lyra's control over it intensified. Suddenly, the field of wreckage exploded outward, crashing into the Council ships with a force so powerful it sent shockwaves through space. The Council fleet staggered under the assault, their ships careening wildly as Lyra's energy tore through their shields. Nathan stared in awe as the debris field became a weapon of unimaginable power, tearing apart the enemy fleet. "Lyra, what are you?" But Lyra didn't answer. She was lost in the energy, her entire being consumed by the raw power flowing through her. The wreckage spiraled around them like a vortex, creating a barrier so dense that not even the Council's weapons could penetrate it. Alara gasped, feeling the energy surge through her as well. "Lyra, I've got it?" Lyra whispered, her voice distant. "I can hold them." Nathan's heart pounded as he looked between the sisters, their combined powers reaching a level he hadn't thought possible. But he knew they couldn't hold it forever. The energy was too much, too unstable. "We've got enough power for the jump," Nathan shouted, slamming his hand down on the console. With a final surge of energy, the Starbound shot forward, disappearing into the depths of space, leaving the Council's battered fleet behind. As the stars blurred into streaks of light outside the viewport, the ship went silent. Lyra collapsed to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. Alara rushed to her side, her face pale with worry. "Lyra!" Alara cried, shaking her gently. "Are you okay?" Lyra's eyes fluttered open, a faint smile on her lips. "We did it," she whispered, her voice weak but triumphant. Nathan knelt beside them, his hand resting gently on Lyra's shoulder. "You saved us." Lyra looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "I couldn't have done it without you." As the ship sailed through the quiet void of space, the sisters and Nathan shared a moment of silent relief. They had survived, but the battle wasn't over. The Council would come for them again. But now, they were ready. They were no longer just survivors, they were fighters. And together, they would take on whatever the galaxy threw at them next. The Starbound floated through the peaceful vastness of space, the endless stars twinkling outside the cockpit, a stark contrast to the chaos and destruction they had just narrowly escaped. Inside the ship, however, the atmosphere was tense, the weight of recent events heavy on everyone's shoulders. Lyra lay in her bunk, her body weak and her mind racing. The raw power she had unleashed during their escape had both terrified and thrilled her. She had felt invincible for a moment, like she was connected to the universe itself, but the energy had taken its toll. She could still feel the strange alien force coursing through her, waiting, simmering beneath the surface, begging to be tapped again. Alara sat beside her, worry etched on her face. She had watched her sister wield power unlike anything they had seen before. Power that reminded her of the stories their mother used to tell, the stories of the arran, their ancestors, who could manipulate the very fabric of the universe. But now, looking at Lyra's pale face, she feared what this power might cost them both. "You pushed yourself too far," Alara said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Lyra's face. "You could have died." Lyra shook her head weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't have a choice. If I hadn't, we'd all be dead." Alara frowned, her heart aching. "You need to be careful. That kind of power, It's dangerous. I can feel it too, but we don't understand it yet. We don't know what it's doing to us. Lyra met her sister's gaze, her eyes filled with both exhaustion and determination. We don't have time to be careful, Alara. The Council's not going to stop. If we want to survive, we have to fight, and that means using every weapon we have. Before Alara could respond, Nathan appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had been giving the sisters space since the battle, but it was clear that something was on his mind. "How are you feeling?" Nathan asked, his voice gentle but laced with concern. Lyra forced a small smile. "Like I just survived an asteroid field and a fleet of warships. So, not great." Nathan chuckled softly, though the worry in his eyes didn't fade. "You scared the hell out of me back there. What you did, it was incredible, but I've never seen anything like it." Lyra sat up slightly, wincing as pain shot through her body. "Neither have I." Nathan hesitated for a moment before stepping closer, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "Lyra, Alara, we need to talk about what happened. That power you used, it wasn't just any ability. I've studied the arran, but what you did back there was beyond anything I've ever read about." Alara looked at Nathan, her own anxiety growing. "We've always had these abilities, but they've never been this strong before. It's like something's changing inside us." Nathan nodded, his brow furrowed. "I've been thinking the same thing. The energy you're drawing on, it's not just a mutation. It's tied to the arran's legacy. Your powers are evolving, but the question is, why now?" Lyra and Alara exchanged a glance, both of them sensing the same unspoken question. Something had triggered this surge in power, something beyond their control. But what? Nathan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "There's a place I've heard about. A planet hidden deep in the outer rim. Some say it's where the last remnants of the arran civilization still exist. If we go there, we might find answers. We might learn how to control your powers before they control you." Lyra's eyes flickered with a mix of hope and fear. "You think we can find this place? That it still exists?" Nathan nodded. "It's risky, and the journey won't be easy. The Council will be hunting us harder than ever, but if we're going to understand your powers, if we're going to stand a chance against them, we need to go there." Alara looked at her sister, her voice filled with both determination and concern. "Lyra, if we go, there's no going back. The Council will never stop chasing us." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of their situation pressing down on her. But when she opened them, her decision was clear. "Then we'll stop running, we'll find this planet, and we'll learn to fight." It took days to navigate the treacherous route to the outer rim, with Nathan using every trick he knew to keep them hidden from the Council's patrols. Finally, they arrived at Nova Prime, a planet known for its resistance to the Council's tyranny. Nestled within a cluster of stars, Nova Prime was a haven for outcasts, rebels, and those seeking to escape the Council's iron grip. As the Starbound entered Nova Prime's atmosphere, the sisters marveled at the sight below. The planet was lush and green, a stark contrast to the barren moons and desolate worlds they had known for so long. Forests stretched for miles, and in the distance, a city shimmered with light, Nova Prime's capital, where the Resistance fighters gathered. Nathan guided the ship to a hidden landing pad on the outskirts of the city, where a small group of Resistance members awaited them. They were met by Tessa Ron, the leader of the local Resistance, a fierce woman with piercing blue eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "We've been expecting you," Tessa said, her gaze locking onto Nathan with a mixture of suspicion and respect. "Word of your exploits has reached us, Captain Pierce, but bringing 2 mutants with you? That's a bold move." Nathan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Lyra and Alara aren't just mutants. They're the key to something bigger. The Council wants to control them, but they don't understand what they're dealing with." Tessa glanced at the sisters, her eyes narrowing. "The Council's been after you for a long time. They think you're dangerous. What makes you different from the others?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tension. "We don't want to fight, but if we're forced to, we'll fight for our freedom. The Council won't stop until they control everything. People like us, people like you. We need your help to learn more about who we are, what we can do." Tessa studied her for a long moment before nodding. "You'll find no friends in the Council here, but understand this. We fight for survival. If you bring the Council's wrath down on us, we won't hesitate to protect what's ours. Nathan nodded, his voice resolute. We're not here to cause trouble, we're here to find answers. Tessa gave a curt nod, then gestured toward the city. Come, we'll provide you with a safe place to rest, but if the Council finds us, we fight together. As they followed Tessa into the heart of Nova Prime, the tension in Lyra's chest began to ease. For the first time in years, they had found a place that felt like a home, somewhere they could rest, regroup, and plan their next move. But the peace didn't last long. As they entered the city, an uneasy feeling settled over Lyra, her senses tingling with something she couldn't quite explain. She exchanged a glance with Alara, who seemed to feel it too. Something was coming. The Council's reach was long, and even here, in the heart of the Resistance, their enemies would not rest. But now, with Nathan by their side and the Resistance as their allies, Lyra and Alara were no longer just fugitives. They were warriors, ready to face whatever the galaxy threw at them. They had found refuge, but the storm was still brewing on the horizon, and this time, they would be ready for it. The days on Nova Prime were filled with an uneasy calm, as if the air itself knew that a storm was brewing just beyond the horizon. Lyra, Alara, and Nathan spent their time preparing, both physically and mentally, for the battle they knew was coming. Nova Prime's hidden resistance welcomed them, but the tension in the city was palpable. The Council would come eventually. It was only a matter of when. Lyra felt it in her bones every time she walked through the sprawling forests outside the city. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was a silence before an inevitable clash. Nathan had been working with Tessa Ran and her resistance forces, training them in tactics he'd learned from his years running from the Council. They had fortified their defenses, but they all knew it wouldn't be enough. Nova Prime had faced smaller skirmishes with the Council in the past, but nothing like what was coming. This time, the Council wasn't coming to intimidate or control, they were coming to destroy. And the reason for their ruthlessness? Lyra and Alara. Sitting in their temporary quarters one evening, Lyra looked out the window at the twilight sky, her heart heavy with the weight of responsibility. She could feel the power inside her, stirring, growing stronger with each passing day. Since their escape from Tyrannus, something had awakened in her. But it wasn't just her, Alara felt it too. Their powers had evolved, becoming more potent but also more unpredictable. Alara entered the room quietly, sensing her sister's unease. She sat beside Lyra, her expression serious. You feel it, don't you? Lyra nodded, not taking her eyes off the darkening sky. They're coming, Alara. And when they do, I don't know if we'll be enough. Alara reached for Lyra's hand, squeezing it tightly. We'll be enough. We have to be. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Nathan stepped inside, his face grim. Tessa just received a transmission. The Council's fleet is en route. They'll be here in less than 24 hours. Lyra's stomach tightened. The moment they had been dreading was finally upon them. How many ships? Alara asked, her voice calm but laced with tension. Too many, Nathan replied, running a hand through his hair. A full battalion, at least. They're coming for you. Coming to wipe out the Resistance entirely. They won't stop until Nova Prime is ash. Lyra stood, the weight of her decision settling over her like a shroud. Then we make our stand here. If we run, they'll follow. If we hide, they'll burn this planet to the ground to find us. Nathan stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. We'll fight together. But this isn't just a fight for survival anymore. This is about the galaxy. If the Council gets what they want, if they control people like you, there won't be any safe place left. Alara nodded, standing beside her sister. Then we stop them. Here. Now. The next morning, the city of Nova Prime buzzed with preparations for the battle ahead. Tessa had gathered the resistance forces, and Nathan had worked tirelessly through the night to coordinate the defense strategy. They knew the Council's forces were overwhelming, but they had one advantage: Lyra and Alara. In the center of the city, the sisters stood side by side, facing the gathered resistance fighters. There was a mix of fear and determination in the faces of those who had chosen to stand against the Council, and Lyra felt the weight of their trust in her. They weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for everyone who had ever been oppressed, cast aside, or feared because they were different. Lyra took a deep breath, stepping forward to address the crowd. "I know many of you are afraid," she began, her voice steady. "I won't lie to you. The Council is powerful. Their fleet is vast, and they have weapons that can destroy worlds. But we have something they don't. We have hope, we have each other, and we have the power to stand against them." Alara joined her, her voice filled with quiet strength. "We've spent our entire lives running, hiding, trying to survive. But no more. Today, we fight not just for ourselves, but for every world that has suffered under the Council's tyranny. Together, we will make them remember that freedom is something worth fighting for." Nathan stood behind them, his eyes filled with pride and determination. He had always believed in the strength of the human spirit. But standing beside Lyra and Alara, he knew that this was more than just a fight for freedom. It was the beginning of something new. The Council's grip on the galaxy was loosening, and these sisters, these warriors, were the key to breaking it entirely. The Resistance fighters cheered, raising their weapons in defiance. The battle ahead would be brutal, but they were ready. They had to be. The Council's fleet arrived with terrifying precision. Massive warships descended through the atmosphere, casting long shadows over the city as they prepared to unleash their full might on Nova Prime. The Resistance forces took their positions, hidden in the city's defenses, while Lyra, Alara, and Nathan stood at the forefront, ready to lead the charge. As the first wave of Council dropships deployed their ground forces, the battle began in earnest. Blaster fire lit up the sky, and the sound of explosions echoed through the city's streets. The Resistance fought fiercely, but the Council's forces were relentless, pressing forward with overwhelming force. Lyra and Alara stood in the heart of the chaos, their powers unleashed. Lyra manipulated the electromagnetic fields around them, creating barriers that deflected incoming fire and disarmed enemy soldiers. Alara controlled the gravity around the battlefield, sending entire platoons of Council troops flying into the air, their weapons torn from their hands. Nathan fought alongside them, leading the Resistance with precision and skill. He directed the fighters with calm authority, using the city's layout to their advantage, but even he knew it wouldn't be enough. The Council's fleet was too large, their forces too well equipped, they were losing ground with every passing minute. "More ships are landing," Nathan shouted over the comms as another wave of Council dropships descended from the sky. Lyra's eyes blazed with power as she deflected another barrage of blaster fire. "We can't hold them much longer." Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the battlefield, and Lyra turned to see one of the Council's massive warships hovering above the city, its cannons aimed directly at them. The ship's weapons powered up, a bright glow emanating from its underside as it prepared to unleash a devastating strike. Alara's face paled. "Lyra, that ship, it's going to level the city." Panic surged through Lyra's chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "We have to stop it, now." But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they didn't have the power to take down a ship that size. "Not yet. Get the Resistance back," Nathan shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "We'll figure something out, but we need to get the civilians out of here." As the city's evacuation began, Lyra and Alara exchanged a glance. They knew what they had to do. "I can't stop that ship on my own," Lyra said, her voice steady. "But together, maybe we can." Alara nodded, fear and determination warring in her heart. "We'll give it everything we have." Nathan looked at them, his heart pounding. "What are you?" Before he could finish, Lyra and Alara reached for each other's hands, their combined power surging through them like a tidal wave. The air around them crackled with energy as they focused their powers on the warship above, their minds and bodies straining under the force of the connection. The battlefield fell silent as a storm of energy erupted around Lyra and Alara, their powers combining into something greater than either of them had ever imagined. The Council's warship, its cannons glowing with deadly intent, seemed to hesitate in the face of the sisters' rising strength. Lyra's mind raced as she pushed herself further, drawing on every ounce of power she had. Her body screamed in protest, but she couldn't stop now. Not when the fate of Nova Prime hung in the balance. She could feel the electromagnetic fields bending to her will, wrapping around the warship, holding it in place. Alara's face was pale with concentration, her hands trembling as she manipulated the gravity around the warship. The ship groaned under the pressure, its engines struggling to break free from the sisters' grip. But the strain of controlling such immense power was taking its toll. Alara could feel her strength waning, her control slipping. "Lyra, I can't hold it much longer," Alara gasped, her voice weak. "You're not alone," Lyra replied, her voice filled with resolve. "We're doing this together." Nathan watched in awe and horror as the sisters' power intensified, the air crackling with energy. He had never seen anything like it. The sheer magnitude of their abilities was breathtaking, but it was clear that they were pushing themselves to the brink. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast," Nathan shouted, his voice filled with urgency. "That ship's about to fire." With one final surge of energy, Lyra and Alara focused their combined power on the warship's core. The ship's cannons began to flicker, the glowing energy faltering as the sisters' power tore through its systems. The warship shuddered, its engines whining as it lost control. Then, with a deafening explosion, the warship's core overloaded, sending a massive shockwave through the air. The ship disintegrated in a brilliant flash of light, its remains scattering across the battlefield like falling stars. For a moment, everything was still. The Council's forces halted, stunned by the destruction of their flagship. The Resistance fighters, watching from the ground, erupted in cheers, their hope rekindled by the sisters' victory. But Lyra and Alara collapsed to the ground, their bodies limp from the exertion. Nathan rushed to their side, his heart pounding in his chest as he knelt beside them. "Lyra, Alara." Nathan's voice was filled with panic as he checked their pulses, his hands trembling. "Come on, stay with me." Lyra's eyes fluttered open, her voice barely a whisper. Did we win?" Nathan smiled, tears in his eyes. Yeah, we won." Alara stirred beside her sister, her breath shallow but steady. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. As the Resistance forces pushed the remaining Council troops back, the sisters lay in Nathan's arms, their bodies weak but their spirits triumphant. They had fought for their freedom, for the freedom of Nova Prime, and they had won. The galaxy had witnessed their power, and the Council's grip was beginning to falter. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Council would come again, stronger than before, and Lyra and Alara would have to face them once more. But now, they knew they weren't alone. Nathan looked down at the sisters, his heart swelling with pride and love. They had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious, and together they would continue to fight for a galaxy free from fear and oppression. The heart of the rebellion had begun. The aftermath of the battle was a mixture of silence and hope. The Council's forces had been repelled, their flagship destroyed by the combined power of Lyra and Alara, and for the first time in years, the Resistance on Nova Prime dared to believe that they had a chance. But even in victory, there was no time for rest. The sun rose over the planet, casting long shadows over the smoldering remains of the battlefield. Resistance fighters walked among the debris, tending to the wounded and fortifying the city's defenses for the next inevitable assault. Nathan stayed by Lyra and Alara's side as they recovered from the immense strain of the fight. In a quiet room within the Resistance headquarters, Lyra opened her eyes. The world around her was blurry at first, but as her vision cleared, she saw Nathan sitting beside her, his face etched with worry and relief. She tried to sit up, wincing as a wave of exhaustion washed over her. "Take it easy," Nathan said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder to steady her. "You need to rest." Lyra's voice was weak, but her resolve was intact. "What about Alara? Is she okay?" Nathan nodded. "She's resting just like you. You both pushed yourselves too far, but you did it. You saved Nova Prime." Lyra looked away, her thoughts clouded with guilt. "I didn't think we'd make it. I was ready to, sacrifice myself." "You didn't have to," Nathan replied, his voice full of admiration. "You fought harder than anyone I've ever seen. You and Alara, you're stronger than you realize." Before Lyra could respond, the door to the room slid open, and Tessa Rand entered, her expression serious but filled with gratitude. "You two saved us," she said, walking over to them. "If you hadn't destroyed that flagship, the city would have been lost." Lyra managed a faint smile. "We couldn't have done it without your help." Tessa nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at the sisters. "The Council won't take this defeat lightly. They'll be back, and next time, they'll bring an even bigger fleet." Nathan stood, crossing his arms. "We can't stay here. If we do, the next battle will wipe Nova Prime off the map. Tessa frowned, clearly torn. But where will you go? The council has eyes everywhere. Lyra sat up straighter, ignoring the ache in her muscles. There's a place. Nathan mentioned it before. The hidden Arran planet. We think that's where we'll find the answers we need. And with those answers, we can fight the council in ways they can't imagine. Tessa's eyes widened. The Arran? You think there are still remnants of their civilization out there? We know it, Nathan said, his voice filled with determination. If we can find it, we can learn more about Lyra and Alara's powers, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to turn the tide of this war. Tessa considered this for a moment before nodding. Then we'll hold the line here. The council won't know where you've gone, and we'll buy you as much time as we can. Lyra felt a surge of gratitude for the resistance leader. Thank you, Tessa. We'll be back, and when we are, we'll be ready. The preparations for their departure were swift. Lyra and Alara, though still recovering, knew they couldn't stay on Nova Prime any longer. The council would return, and if they were to stand a chance in the coming war, they needed to unlock the full potential of their powers. The journey to the hidden Arran planet was their only hope. As they stood on the landing pad, overlooking the lush forests and shimmering city of Nova Prime, Nathan and the sisters exchanged a solemn glance. The battle had taken its toll on them all, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between them. You sure about this? Nathan asked, his voice quiet as he looked at Lyra and Alara. Alara nodded, her gaze steady. We don't have a choice. This is our only path forward. Lyra glanced at Nathan, her heart heavy with the unspoken feelings that had been building between them. You're coming with us, right? Nathan smiled, his eyes softening. I'm not going anywhere without you two. As they prepared to board the Starbound, Tessa and a group of resistance fighters approached them. Good luck out there, Tessa said, her voice filled with respect. We'll keep fighting here, but we'll need you to come back stronger than ever. Lyra nodded, her voice filled with quiet determination. We will. The ramp of the Starbound lifted, and as the engines roared to life, Lyra, Alara, and Nathan prepared to leave Nova Prime behind. Their next journey would be their most dangerous yet, but it was also their most important. They weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the galaxy. The Starbound soared through the stars, leaving the familiar sights of Nova Prime far behind. Lyra, Alara, and Nathan were now venturing into the unknown, toward a planet shrouded in mystery, a place that held the key to their survival and the future of the galaxy. As they drifted through the silence of space, Nathan sat in the cockpit, charting their course toward the rumored location of the hidden Arran world. It wasn't on any official star maps, and few knew of its existence. But the clues Nathan had gathered over the years suggested it lay deep within the outer rim, hidden in a region where the council had no control. Lyra and Alara stood beside him, watching the stars pass by. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was an underlying tension, an awareness that everything they had done so far had led to this moment. The fate of countless worlds now rested on their shoulders. Nathan glanced at Lyra, his eyes filled with admiration. You've come a long way from the woman I met on Tyrannus. Lyra smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I never thought I'd leave that moon, but now I can't imagine going back. Alara stepped forward, her voice thoughtful. Do you think we'll find the answers we're looking for? What if the planet is gone, or the knowledge we need is lost? Nathan's gaze hardened with resolve. It's not gone. We'll find it, and when we do, we'll learn everything we need to defeat the council. The ship continued on its journey, the tension building as they neared their destination. As the Starbound entered the region of space where the Arran world was said to be located, the ship's sensors picked up an anomaly. A planet hidden within a nebula, its surface cloaked in an impenetrable fog. There it is, Nathan murmured, his voice filled with awe. The Arran homeworld. Lyra and Alara exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. This was it, the place where their ancestors had once ruled, where the power that flowed through their veins had been born. As the Starbound descended through the thick clouds of the planet's atmosphere, the sisters felt a strange energy in the air. It was familiar, yet foreign, like the echoes of their own power resonating from deep within the planet's core. When they landed, the three of them stepped out onto the surface of the planet, the air thick with the weight of history. Massive, ancient structures loomed in the distance, their alien architecture a testament to the once great civilization that had flourished here. Lyra took a deep breath, her hand instinctively reaching for Alara's. This is where it all began. Alara squeezed her sister's hand, her voice filled with quiet reverence. And this is where we'll learn how to end it. Nathan stood beside them, his heart swelling with hope. Together, they would uncover the secrets of the arran, harness the full potential of Lyra and Alara's powers, and return to the galaxy stronger than ever. The battle against the Council was far from over, but now, they had the key to winning it. As the sun rose over the ancient ruins, casting a golden light across the alien landscape, the three of them stood at the dawn of a new chapter in their journey. The fight for freedom, for the future of the galaxy, was just beginning. But with each other and the power of the arran behind them, they knew they were ready.